I'm David Bank, and from Impact Alpha, this is an Agents of Impact podcast.
What we look for is technologies that can take a waste stream that is undervalued and give it more value.
That's Lucy Mortimer of Archipelago Ventures, a UK-based early-stage climate fund investing in materials innovations that enable a truly circular economy. Archipelago is investing in everything from enzymes that deconstruct composite textiles to AI-powered sorting systems that can distinguish between a nylon 6 carpet and a nylon 6/6. I spoke with Lucy about why materials are a sleeper cell in the climate crisis and how Archipelago is innovating in the fundraising process itself with collective diligence, in which Archipelago's prospective partners work together to ask them the hard questions. Archipelago has been an active and early user of Impact Alpha Edge, Impact Alpha's premium databases and other investment tools for fund managers and other agents of impact. I think you'll enjoy our conversation. Lucy Mortimer, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, David. Nice to be here.
Lucy, I've been fascinated by materials. We were told that we were going to a digital world and everything was dematerializing, and instead, all we seem to be talking about is critical minerals and materials and material science. Archipelago Ventures is deep into this. What got you into the material world of materials?
It's a really interesting question, isn't it? I mean, who would have thought 6 years ago we'd be talking about critical mineral and supply chains as one of the key drivers when you pick up the newspaper these days, or the virtual paper? We came to this from two angles. One is around 2019 when David Attenborough, who has, of course, been so influential in this space, was talking about Blue Planet effect and the idea of the impact of materials in our oceans and what that would do to ocean health and also what it would do to human health, but also from the recognition that with our backgrounds, we come from climate finance, we understood that the material draw on our natural capital was increasingly being a driver for significant carbon emissions, and that Scope 3 carbon emissions are this kind of hidden giant. This area is really hard to affect change within because there are so many stakeholders. And we thought, well, this is a challenge. This is something that we should do. We'd come from a space where we were innovators in the early 2000s in climate finance. We thought we could do it again. We didn't probably realize it was quite as hard as it is. But I don't think anyone did at that point.
Help us just understand the sort of state of materials. There's so much interesting science going on, enzymes and bio-based petrochemicals and things. What is the state of play in the science or the technology?
So we're in this really interesting period of innovation where apparently the number of patents being filed for this particular sector, let's call it broadly circular economy, is seeing exponential growth. It's fascinating that everyone's coming to the idea that we need to rethink the traditional polymer and plastic economy, which developed in the 1950s and has remained fairly static up until now. It served its purpose. It did a really good job. It protected food. It was very cheap, and it remains very cheap. But there's now a recognition that there are other things that you can do, both at the start of life, so material innovation, looking at different precursor chemicals that you could extract. One of our investments looks at breaking open lignin from it's a byproduct of the pulp and paper sector, so it contains some interesting chemistry in there. You can use approaches to crack that open and create chemicals which can displace fossil-based chemicals in the manufacture of PET, for example. Then all the way through to end of life, using enzymes, as you say, to deconstruct materials, textiles, for example, that have both a natural cotton-based component and a synthetic component. And you can find ways of taking those apart so that you can recover both components. The thing is that you can't recover and process any material if you can't identify what it is, or if it's a composite, if you can't separate out those two or more elements.
I notice you have a lot of sorting companies in your portfolio that are picking out valuable things, I imagine, from the trash streams. And I think part of this is that really you're finding value in this materials supply chain that either was literally thrown out in the form of waste, or was not realized in the form of cheaper ways to make things. And so these are investable propositions that you're finding in terms of the way that the world gets supplied with materials, no?
Yeah, absolutely are. We call them enabling technologies. So technologies that can either, as you say, sort materials, or that can aid identification of materials. So that can be anything from chemicals that you can embed within textiles so that you can tell what's in them, like a chemical code, all the way through to AI spectral analysis of textiles so that you can see if a carpet is nylon 6 or nylon 66, it makes a difference to how you recycle it at the end of its life. So if you can identify, you can then extract value. And what we look for is technologies that can take a waste stream that is undervalued and give it more value. Perhaps, for example, in a MRF, if you can get more value out of a ton of plastic waste, there's more rationale for recycling it, and therefore there's more rationale for collecting it. That's where we're trying to move the dial to.
Okay, so let's take Archipelago itself, because you've also taken an innovative approach to building the firm and building the fund. And I know you got started with with an accelerator, and you could see some of the very early stage innovations, I imagine, coming out of the lab and maybe coming out of universities.
We do. So, in fact, the accelerator is looking to encourage that sort of science based innovation, particularly in the UK. We're driven by the impact outcomes of our backer, which is a group called RAP, which was part of the UK government, is now spun out and is now a well-known climate NGO, and we manage part of their endowment. What we look for in the way that we are trying to identify investments for the Circular Plastics Accelerator is particular impact outcomes that can increase material circularity, and particularly in the UK. But we came at this because for an emerging manager like Archipelago, it's very hard to be fundraising during a period of war. And at that point, it was the Ukraine war. Now, of course, we have a whole new war to contend with. But at that point, we had some amazingly sympathetic, supportive LPs who really wanted to back us. And instead of thinking this is too hard, we challenged ourselves to find a new model that would enable us to bring those LP commitments into investments in a different way. That's how we came to create the Circular Plastics Accelerator, which is a single investor vehicle that wraps capital behind it, looking to drive impact outcomes that they were trying to achieve through our investments. We try to be quite innovative, not just in the investments that we back, but also in how we approach a deployment of capital.
So in your portfolio, Lucy, how do you drive impact? How do you know whether you're having impact?
It's something we challenge ourselves on a lot, David. And partway through the accelerator, the Circular Plastics Accelerator development, we realized that the portfolio companies that we were investing in, they are a bit like us. They're time poor, they're pretty stretched, they're very focused on what they're trying to do. And they didn't have the capacity to undertake the work to give us the information as a fund or as an investor that we wanted around how they were either going to generate impact or were generating impact. And we wondered how we could help them with this. So we've come up with this model, which is called the Archipelago Academy, and it's a technical assistance facility that sits alongside the fund. It's a not-for-profit. We'll spin it out from the fund eventually. And it supports all of our portfolio companies and the companies that we plan to invest in that are in the pipeline, with thinking around how you bring impact metrics into your business, how you consider impact, and how you apply those principles. We do that with in-person days. So it's like a training program where we bring in some brilliant experts. The cost is shared across all of the portfolio companies and we bear some of that cost. What we've realized is that in doing so, this really unlocks something for our portfolio companies because they get to talk to each other and they get to ask themselves really interesting, deep questions about how their technologies can overlay across one another, how they can help each other with investors, problems, HR, for example, is something that comes up a lot. What we seem to be unlocking is this idea of collectivism again, where rather than just acting individually, we can build something greater by putting people in a room together.
The impact alpha thesis might be that actually aiming for deeper impact and even measuring that impact becomes a kind of management tool that steers you in the right direction, not just an overhead kind of reporting, tick the box exercise. Are you finding that to be true, or is it still just an overhead chore?
No, absolutely, and I think what we've realised is that for many managers, this is a bit set aside. It's quite hard to do because ultimately, your startups you're investing in, you want them to be concentrating on the business. So it's quite hard to drive thinking around impact with them. So how do you make it accessible? How do you bring something to the table as an active investor without putting too much on the startups? And so Academy is one of those ways that we are finding that is a really interesting mechanism where we are adding value, they're getting value. We then can lay over different or overlay different things into Academy. So we've had interesting lectures or interesting speakers coming in, I should say, on how to build a culture, how to be your best CEO, how to structure your cap table, how to plan for Series B and beyond. Quite wide-reaching, but putting our startups into connection with people who will give their advice. They're all doing it pro bono. They're all brilliant friends, network, people within our networks who want to participate in things like this. And then we cap it all off with a few hours of, we call it sort of networking, I suppose, very broadly. But effectively what it is our network coming into the same room as our startups when they don't need to fundraise, and building those points of connection so that when they next need to fundraise, the investors already know who they are. There's no need for sort of knocking on the doors. The investors are waiting to hear from them. So we're really excited about what is emerging from Archipelago Academy, not just in terms of the outcomes, but actually the way that we're able to affect impact with them.
Nice. I think that goes under the category of beyond the check support. And I think you've made about half a dozen investments out of that accelerator, and some of them, as you said, are about textile recycling, bio-based chemicals from wood, sorting of trash, as we said. And then the next stage, I guess, is build a fund.
It is build a fund, which is exactly what we have done. And we've done it in a slightly different way to how some other groups might traditionally approach it. And again, it stems from the need to innovate around how you drive capital from allocators towards investments. We know that we're a young manager, we're an emerging manager, and this is a really difficult space to be investing in. So it's helpful for us to develop a track record and to bring our LPs into connection with our portfolio in an easy way. So rather than trying to just build a fund in a very vanilla way, we've actually launched the fund with seed capital from our amazing anchor, Builders Vision, who've been so incredibly supportive, as has RAP, around how to do things differently. So we've launched a UK fund. At the moment, it's raising for its next close, which we're targeting for later this year. We are trying to bring sympathetic capital alongside Builders and alongside RAP, who will also be part of that fund, and build a portfolio of stage investments.
Yeah, let's just pause on that because it is an interesting way to build a fund. And Builder's Vision, of course, the family office of Lucas Walton, one of the heirs to the Walmart fortune, and they've done a number of interesting things and launched many ventures out of that family office. Very keen on climate, as you say, and they're helping you kind of do the fundraising in a different way. Tell us about the co-diligence process.
Yes, we call it collective diligence. And we are still really learning what this means, David. Yeah, it's not something that seems to be very common. We know of one brilliant fund who've done it really well, but we are trying to challenge the way that things are done, which up to now seems to have been very one-to-one and not particularly transparent and quite difficult for managers to drive unless you're really established.
I think that's an understatement, Lucy. Grueling, I think, is the and time consuming and brutal, I think, is the words that some managers would use.
It is. And I know lots who have given up on this journey, and I absolutely don't blame them. I think one of the things we recognize, and I was actually challenged to this by a really seasoned asset manager. He said, why aren't you thinking about this differently? And so we did. And we realized that one of the things that inhibits allocators from making commitments to funds like ours is a lack of transparency around timelines, who's doing what, who else is in. It always the answer is we love what you do, but come back to us when you've got your first close in order. It's not that people aren't willing to come in for the first close, but they are often, I think, time poor and unwilling to put the time in for diligence on their own if it's an unfamiliar area and they don't know that the fund's actually going to close. So, taking that as a principle, we thought, okay, let's do it differently. So, we are launching next week our first collective diligence call where we're putting all of our prospective LPs into a virtual room led with our anchors, Builders Vision and RAP, who are there in our place. We are stepping out of the process in order to give space to our LPs to work with our anchors to ask those difficult questions without us being in the room, with the idea that collectively they'll be able to unlock who does what around diligence much more efficiently than they can on their own. The idea is that we'll hopefully be able to move them along the same timeline, looking to generate impacts that they really want to back, and get us to the next close in a different way.
Well, so there's collective diligence, but it's also collective impact in a sense, in that they'd be working together through you as a manager, but also to have a kind of more coherent strategy around this materials opportunity that you're targeting, and they would come in together and make the next close happen. That would be a huge accomplishment, Lucy, when that comes through.
But it's absolutely a challenging time. It's never an easy time to raise money, but it's even harder when you've come out of one war and you're into another, and all the pressures around supply chains and focus on the geopolitical stage. Here in the UK, we may be losing our prime minister today. Who knows? We're still waiting to find out whether that will play out. There's a lot of things that make it difficult for emerging managers to raise. There's also has always been difficulty in female or mixed team managers raising. As you know, as female or co-female funds, we receive 10% of the funding that is allocated to venture, which is really hard. But one of the things we're really
And outperform, as I understand. So,
but really interestingly for me, certainly, is that in putting together this collective diligence process, almost everyone included in this process, David, is female. And that's not deliberate, it's not intentional. It's just something that seems to have come into play in that we have some amazing female allocators who are stepping up and saying, yeah, I will put some time into this because I can see that this has value, particularly right now when climate is not at the top of everyone's agenda. Materiality is not at the top of everyone's agenda because they're quite focused on all the other things that are going on. But still, the impacts, the negative impacts of climate and materials are growing exponentially. So if we don't act, the inaction is actually an impact in itself.
Well, I very much appreciate the sort of can-do and take action approach you've taken, both through the accelerator and now the fund. And we'll be watching, Lucy, and we'll be watching the materials space because it is extremely material, as you say. So I hope you'll come back and let us know how it's going and keep the other agents of impact reading Impact Alpha informed about what Archipelago is doing. So thank you very much, Lucy.
Thank you, Dave. And, we really hope this process works, not just for us, but actually, if other funds can take something from this in terms of how they approach transparency and fundraising, that would be a really great impact for us to have generated too. So keep your fingers crossed for us.
I imagine you'll get some calls on that very topic, Lucy, so get ready.
Welcome, yes.
That's going to do it for this Agents of Impact podcast. Big thanks to Lucy Mortimer, to our producer Isaac Silk, to the whole team at Impact Alpha, and to all of you Agents of Impact, with deep gratitude for all that you do.